Good, yeah, and I'm rewinding just a little bit. Of course, the ordinary soldiers didn't have much fun. For one thing, there was always the snow. It came down in a great blizzard about a week after the troops had started to build the encampment. Their huts were not finished, and they were forced to work in bitter cold and storm. And the cold was a problem. The huts were really just tiny log cabins, with big stone fireplaces making the whole rear wall. In cold weather, they had a lot of trouble getting the mortar to set. Because of this, the chimneys leaked so badly that half of the smoke blew back into the room. And the snow made hewing wood difficult too. Sam told us that they were having an awful time getting the huts finished. Even when they were done, they weren't much to live in. 12 soldiers jammed into a 14 by 16 room, breathing more smoke than air, and having to stumble over people whenever they wanted to move around. So think about that. That's the imagery what we were talking about. Think about what you have to do in the middle of the night sometimes. You can barely, well, we always have to breathe. But in the middle of the night, you have some nature calls. You have to wake up. Can you imagine in that room, not much bigger than your bedroom, stumbling over all kinds of different men trying to get out to go take care of your business? Right? And also trying to breathe in, and you're breathing in smoke after smoke. And then when you go outside, it's what kind of weather? It's freezing cold. And the snow never stopped falling. By January, it covered the countryside 3 feet deep, so that the stone walls disappeared. You could drive a sled over the snow anywhere you wanted without paying attention to where the roads were. Sam was able to get into town every week or 10 days. Colonel Parsons used him as a messenger a lot because he knew his way around Reading. Sometimes he would come in with a commissary officer looking for lime or nails or leather or all of the hundreds of things armies need. The idea was that Sam might know who had these things. Often he'd come into the tavern and ask me if I knew who had hay or sleds or something else to sell. To be honest, I felt uneasy about telling him such things. The commissary people always paid for whatever they bought, but it was usually in scrip. And on top of it, the farmer didn't have much choice about selling or not. But I couldn't bring myself to lie to Sam. It was just something I'd never done. All the time, Sam was after us to butcher the cattle. I didn't know what to do. The idea of selling them to the British was gone. With all of the rebel troops around, top of page 178. It was too risky trying to move the cattle anywhere. Besides, it would have been next to impossible in that deep snow. Still, I kept hoping I could find someone who'd offer me a good deal for them. But Sam was pressing me. I'm warning you, Tim. Sooner or later, somebody's going to get them. I thought General Putnam gave strict orders against stealing. Oh, he did. And knowing General Putnam, he'll hang any soldier he catches stealing. Again, here's more foreshadowing, boys and girls. He's tough as nails, but he's honest. Besides, he wants the people to come around to our side. And if he lets the troops forage, he'll lose all sympathy with the populace. Populace, what does that word remind you of?
Population.
Population is the same thing. Oh, I know him. He's had a lot of men flogged already for disobeying orders, and I'm sure he's just itching to catch somebody stealing so he can make an example out of them. Again, boys and girls, heavy, heavy foreshadowing. And when you finish the book, you'll go back and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I should have known. Then what's the worry? Don't be stupid, Tim. A lot of men will take a chance anyway, especially when they are drunk. You wait. Sooner or later, they'll get into your beef if you don't watch it. Mother and I kept churning it around between us. She figured Sam was right. You know what happened to Sally Miles, Heifer? Miss Miles was a widow who lived alone in a tiny hovel in Reading. She had a few tough chickens and one scrawny cow. She kept going mostly by selling and milk and eggs to the people around. A few days earlier, half a dozen drunk soldiers noticed her cow in her barn, butchered it right there, and carried the slabs of beef back to the encampment in the dark. I know, I said, but the thing we need most is rum, and the only way to pay for it is with cattle. And that was the beginning of January. We decided to stick it out through the month. There was a rumor going around that the British were forming up in New York City and were going to raid towns on Long Island. What that meant, nobody knew, but some believed that the men from the encampment would be called down there to fight. I just couldn't make up my mind. The weeks went by. There was nothing anybody wanted but to get through this terrible winter. It didn't seem that the war could really go on much longer. Even Sam thought it would have to end soon. We talked about it one evening when he was there for a short visit. We were sitting in front of the taproom fire one night in late January. I think something decisive will happen in the spring, he said. The English government realizes by now that they are not going to beat us easily. Well, maybe they figured you're too starved and tired to fight much longer. He shook his head seriously. They might be right, he said. The other day, some of the men were actually talking mutiny. You remember that word means? You guys all with me? Top of page 180. Mutiny, does anyone?
Like on a ship?
It's usually associated with a ship. Tate.
Going against your Yeah.
Very good. Going against what you're told, going against your officers, and it's associated usually with ships or perhaps the military. Okay, where did I leave off? There's a mutiny.
There's a lot of blankets.
A
lot of them have no blankets. Thank you. They're short of food, and the pay hasn't come through. A bunch of them decided to march to Harvard and demand their pay. They were about to start out when General Putnam rode up and talked to them out of it. Then he had a couple of the ringleaders shot right there. The ringleaders of the mutiny, by the way, is what he's saying. So he had them shot right there. Yeah. He shows no mercy when he thinks he's right. Suddenly he stopped talking. What was that? I'd heard it too. It was a kind of a thump and then a cow bawling. We listened. There were noises coming from outside somewhere. Sounds like something's bothering the cattle. There are people out there, Sam shouted. Let's go! So we ran through the kitchen toward the barn. It was dark, but there was nearly a full moon reflected on the snow and plenty of light to see what had happened. The barn doors were open. 2 cows were standing in front of the barn, blinking, and we could see 2 more behind. We dashed into the barn. 4 of the cows were gone. No. Oh my gosh, I shouted. Pet 'em up, Sam shouted. They'll be butchering the others somewhere near. There's no chance of driving them very far in this snow. So he darted around the house toward the road, his eyes following the hoof prints in the snow. I snatched a shovel up, and I drove the remaining 4 cattle back into the barn with a handle. They were balky, and it took me a few minutes to get them inside the door, shut and latched. And then I raced across the snow, down around the house to the road. And there I stopped, and I swung my eyes across the horizon. I saw nothing, but distantly I heard the noise of shouting, off toward the far end of the training ground. I ran in the direction of the sounds, and then, suddenly, I saw 3 men walking toward me through the moonlight, side by side. I stopped, and I waited. They came up. The one in the middle was Sam. His nose was bleeding, and there was a cut on his chin. His hands were tied behind his back. I stood in the open white snow field, surrounded by shadowy trees. Sam! I shouted. Timmy, get Colonel Parsons. They're taking me in as a cattle thief. I went cold, and then I turned and ran. Okay, so boys and girls, the questions before my AIG people have to leave. How and where did life pass away? In a complete answer. Life passed away here because of blank. Number 2, why was his death ironic? You remember what that word means?
Yeah.
Number 3, what is the theme of chapter 12? It's a similar theme. Remember, what does theme mean? The message of it. Number 4, how does Betsy feel about the war? In this chapter, how does she feel about the war? Number 5, describe how someone can suffer from want. And I'm not talking about wanting a certain pair of tennis shoes or a video game. Okay, it's a deeper, yes. Number 6, why did the author compare hunger to a nail in your shoe? Number 7, how come Sam ordered Tim to get Colonel Parsons.
Oh.
Last one, and then you can. Can you describe the foreshadowing which occurred in chapter 12?
Yes, I can.